every single one of those states without a stay-at-home order has coronavirus case numbers that are rising. Because every state in the country has coronavirus case numbers that are rising. Nobody is exempt. Nobody's geographically on the sidelines of this. It's everywhere. Case numbers going up everywhere. And case numbers rise exponentially because every infected person, whether or not they've got symptoms, is infecting, on average, more than one additional person. And so if you've got any, you're about to have a lot. But without a national policy for what we're supposed to do to head off those rising numbers, that kind of patchwork is what you get. You know, maybe the governors who still don't have stay-at-home orders, maybe they weren't watching the Today Show today when the Surgeon General accidentally said there was a national stay-at-home order. I mean, maybe someday that'll become official somewhere other than in a single interview on a single TV show by a single official apparently speaking on his own behalf, which some states nevertheless decided to interpret as our federal government's new policy. I mean, it's just insane at this point. It's insane at this point. You look at the other countries in the world that have outbreaks as bad as us, well, actually, we stand alone. You look at other countries in the world who have had terrible outbreaks, at least they've got a national policy. It's insane. It's fatal. It's insane in terms of policy and leadership and ethics. It's also insane in terms of how grossly mismanaged the federal government's piece of this already is. There's no national policy, but at least there is some stuff they're supposed to be running. But look how they're handling that. CNN first to report last night that the Pentagon's offer of 2,000 ventilators that they were going to make available for civilian use and more than a dozen certified labs that they were going to make available for civilian use for processing coronavirus test results. Those offers made more than a couple of weeks ago by the Pentagon have not been taken up. Have not been taken up by the Trump administration because FEMA and the Health and Human Services Administration and the Trump administration, they just elected not to tap those resources from the Pentagon, even while states and mayors and individual hospitals are all scrambling for themselves to try to find those things anywhere they can. Well, one of the places they could find them is our own Pentagon, who is volunteering them, but the Trump administration has left that stuff just sitting. Then there's the national stockpile of emergency medical supplies that's been sending things out hither and yon sort of inexplicably for weeks now. States like Oklahoma and Kentucky receiving things from the stockpile that they never asked for, while other states like Illinois and Massachusetts aren't getting what they asked for at all. Now the Washington Post and the New York Times both have reports citing anonymous federal officials saying tonight that the federal stockpile is basically gone. Although the White House appears to have no idea of that. If they do understand it, they haven't been honest about it. Here's the Washington Post tonight. Quote, the government's emergency stockpile of respirator masks, gloves, and other medical supplies is nearly exhausted, leaving the Trump administration and the states to compete for personal protective equipment in a freewheeling global marketplace rife with profiteering and price gouging. Two Department of Homeland Security officials said the stores kept in the Department of Health and Human Services strategic national stockpile are nearly gone, despite assurances from the White House that there is availability. Why is the White House giving states and mayors assurances that there's availability if there isn't? Do they know that there isn't? Do they know that that stuff is gone? Which is worse, if they don't know and they're saying out of ignorance, oh, sure, we got plenty. Or if they do know that that stuff is gone and they're telling people it's fine, there's plenty, even though they know it's not there. Which is worse? I mean, practically it has the same effect, right? Because the White House has not tried to nationalize the supply chain for personal protective equipment even today, PPE and other critical medical supplies, U.S. companies that manufacture that kind of stuff, even this week, have been selling personal protective equipment that is desperately needed in American hospitals. U.S. companies that make this stuff, even this week, have been selling it overseas, sending it to other countries instead of making it available here. U.S. manufacturers of this stuff, people who've got it in warehouses in this country, are exporting it because the federal government hasn't told them that's a bad idea or they shouldn't be doing it. Forbes reporting that on Monday alone this week, 2 days ago, roughly 280 million masks in warehouses around the United States were purchased by foreign buyers to be sent out of this country because the federal government has not made arrangements to keep that material here for U.S. use. A FEMA spokesperson telling Politico.com that FEMA, quote, has not actively encouraged or discouraged U.S. companies from exporting such materials overseas. The Washington Post reporting that there are no signs that the Trump administration has made any effort to stop U.S. companies from exporting medical masks and other supplies so they could be used in U.S. hospitals instead. Because of course not. The New York Times now reporting this evening that thousands of the ventilators the federal government does have in its stockpile, ventilators that it keeps promising it's going to send out to where they're needed, thousands of those machines do not work because the Trump administration allowed the contract to maintain these machines to lapse last summer. Because of course they did. Please, could we have a new federal government? At least just for this. 4,700 American lives and counting. And this is still how bad they are, how far into it. This far into it, it's not just a case that this virus is a crisis and that this infectious disease is spreading in the United States and we have to cope with it and it's got exponential growth. It's not just the natural attack of the virus. This far into it, with us this much exposed to it already, so much exposed that we're closing in on 5,000 Americans dead by tomorrow, right? With the White House expecting, hoping that they'll keep the death range for Americans between 100,000 and 250,000 people, right? This far into it, the federal government, the stuff they are actively in control of and nobody else is, that stuff doesn't get better ever. They're not nationalizing the federal supply chain, the national supply chain for protective equipment and for other medical supplies. Even when the military is volunteering things for civilian use, they're not even able to get it together to do that. They're not able to get it together to communicate truthful information as to what the federal government's supplies are and how many they have. And the stuff they've got, they have not been keeping in running order because they let the maintenance and supply contracts lapse. And they're not getting any better, you guys. I mean, maybe today the Surgeon General just declared a national stay-at-home order. Maybe. But maybe that was kind of a mistake. Still, it sort of went into effect in a few states.